Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the hushed, dusty wonderland of a Timurid-Era Bookstore. Except it's not exactly a quiet Barnes and Noble. You're in 15th century Herat, smack in the golden age of illuminated manuscripts, royal patronage, and exactly zero fire codes. The sun's just dipping below the tiled minarets, and the air hums with that chalky twilight stillness only found in dry, ancient cities. A soft breeze carries the scent of saffron and ink. Around you, narrow alleys snake into bustling courtyards, where men in quilted robes shuffle past women in jeweled veils. Donkeys loaded with bundles of papyrus and pomegranates bleat in protest. You're weaving through a maze of stone archways, dodging clusters of gossiping poets, each trying to outdo the other with dramatic hand flourishes. One dramatically shouts something about the moon's jealousy of his beloved's eyebrows. Another retorts with a couplet so dense it probably references 8 extinct Greek philosophers and 3 vegetables. Welcome to Herat, the beating literary heart of the Timurid Empire. It's 1460 or so, and you've somehow stumbled into a city obsessed with books, copying them, illuminating them, selling them, arguing about them, and sometimes, if there's time, actually reading them. You probably won't survive this stroll without being tripped into buying a 20-volume commentary on metaphysics. But hey, your nightstand's looking empty anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing who's out there listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way through the outer bazaar, where the smell of cardamom and roasting lamb lingers over ceramic stalls and carpet, sellers napping inside their own wares. But past the spice carts and call to evening prayer, you follow a quieter path. A low archway opens onto a domed passage lined with booksellers. The shift is immediate. The air here is cooler, shaded from the sun, and thick with the scent of parchment, ink, and the unmistakable musk of camphor. Treated scrolls. Someone somewhere is boiling tea, but mostly it smells like wisdom and mildew. To your left, a young scribe sits cross-legged, painstakingly copying verses from the Quran in an elegant Naskh script, his reed pen dipped in walnut ink. He looks about 12, but his concentration is monk level. Next to him, his mentor is balancing a scroll on one knee while dabbing gold onto a margin with terrifying precision. Behind them, piles of manuscript folios lean dangerously against the wall like a drunk tower of Pisa. The scribe glances up once to squint at you, then returns to his lettering. He probably thinks your shoes are ridiculous. He's not wrong. Here in Herat, the book isn't just a thing, it's an event. And the city's patrons, including the famously artsy Sultan Hussein Beykara, treat literature like a high-stakes contact sport. If you aren't quoting Ferdowsi or Rumi in casual conversation, you're basically an illiterate goat herder in this tunnel. Like Arcade, the rhythm of quills scratching parchment forms a kind of sleepy symphony. Scribes mutter to themselves. A parrot screeches the word, kafir, and no one knows who taught it that. Stacks of half-finished commentaries sit waiting for a final flourish. You try not to sneeze. God forbid you smudge a page and have to sell a kidney to pay for it. Historians still argue whether this arcade functioned more like a modern publishing house or just a glorified study hall for elite nerds. One thing's clear, it's not boring in here. Despite the reverence for books, the atmosphere is surprisingly chaotic. One man is frantically searching for a missing volume of the Book of Healing, while another insists someone stole his copy of The Virtues of Lettuce. You think he's joking. He's not. You pass a wall covered in job listings, mostly requests for translators who can read Greek, Syriac, or Mongolian while simultaneously knowing how to make paper out of tree bark and dreams. The pay. 1 meal a day, and the joy of contributing to eternal knowledge. As the evening call to prayer echoes faintly outside. A few scribes stretch their legs and step into the archway for a smoke. One waves a palm leaf fan and declares that if he has to copy another hadith in Kufic script, he'll go blind and sue the Prophet in the afterlife. His friends laugh. Half? Serious. That's the thing about this place, it's full of reverence, but also full of life. You realize these aren't monks in silent contemplation. These are people doing a job, bickering over ink prices, trading gossip about who's secretly in love with the librarian, and debating the merits of camel. Hairbrushes. You settle onto a cool marble step. Watching it all unfold, your mind drifts. The sound of script fills your ears again, hypnotic and soft. You wonder how many of these books will survive, and how many will one day be pieced together by historians who have no idea a parrot once screamed over them. You rise slowly, stretching limbs stiff from sitting on a slab of centuries-old marble, and follow the curve of the passage deeper into the bookstore bazaar. The air thickens with incense and whispers. The arcade gently forks into a vaulted corridor, where the flicker of oil lamps throws long shadows across the tiled floor. It's quieter here. Not silent, but hushed, like everyone's agreed that beauty requires a little reverence. Ahead of you, hunched figures labor under small glass globes filled with lamb fat and burning wicks. These are the illuminators, artists who turn dry script into exploding galaxies of color and gold. They're cramped around low, wooden desks, each workspace a nest of pigments, knives, brushes, and saucers filled with water the shade of ancient moss. One artist uses a fine, tipped squirrel hairbrush to outline the folds of a warrior's robe, each stroke so precise it makes your spine itch. Another applies gold leaf with a breath of air and a curved blade, the delicate shimmer catching in the lamplight, as if the page itself is exhaling. You lean in too close, and someone mutters something unflattering in Persian. Oops. Personal space is apparently also an ancient concept. This stretch of the bazaar feels like walking through a fairy tale assembly line. One stall is filled with depictions of battle scenes from the Shahnameh, King's Mid-Roar, demons bleeding ultramarine. Another shows calmer scenes, garden picnics, lovers exchanging apples, scholars' nose deep in scrolls. There's even a page with a lion cuddling a drowsy-looking gazelle. You're not sure that's how nature works, but okay. You stop at a stall where two illuminators are locked in a heated debate about cobalt. One claims his batch is from Kashan, which gives it a superior blue tone. The other scoffs. His comes from Samarkand and was blessed by a Sufi, allegedly while riding a donkey backwards. The argument escalates until a third artisan suggests they just mix the paints and see which one the gold adheres to better. Peace, for now. Historians still argue whether the illuminators were seen as full artists in their own right or merely decorators beneath the calligraphers in the pecking order. What's clear is that these guys don't consider themselves mere scribble colorers. They gossip about who's been invited to work on a manuscript for the Sultan's daughter's wedding, who botched the nose on a celestial being last week, and who's been stealing malachite powder and replacing it with green chalk. Someone offers you a piece of saffron candy and a warning not to blink near the drying pages. Gold dust gets everywhere, and the last person who sneezed near an unfinished kern page had to fast for 3 days out of sheer guilt. A cat darts between your ankles. No collar, very important, and lands squarely on a half-dried page. Gasps erupt. The owner groans but says nothing. It's probably divine will. The cat, clearly aware of its status, stretches luxuriously and then disappears under a nearby bench, like a velvet ghost. You pause at a table where a wide-eyed apprentice is grinding pigments with a mortar and pestle. He's got lapis lazuli flakes, dried beetle shells, saffron threads, and, no joke, powdered oyster. The mixture smells faintly of sadness and wealth. He's whispering the steps to himself like an incantation, careful not to splash. Over his shoulder, the master illuminator watches, arms crossed, nodding once every 5 minutes. That's approval around here. The apprentice tells you quietly that certain inks require being sung to while stirred, or else the colors fade. You don't know if he's joking, but his voice is so sincere you half expect the pigment to hum back. By now your head's spinning, not from the incense, but from the sheer detail. The miniatures aren't just illustrations, they're entire worlds folded into a handspan. Every pattern on a robe has meaning. Every flower has metaphor. Every halo of gold around a prophet's head has been burnished so precisely it could signal aircraft from the sky. You move on, more reverently now, and pass a wall pinned with finished works drying on lines like wet laundry. Pages flutter in the faint breeze, glowing with layered paint and calligraphy so perfect it feels like divine handwriting. You find yourself holding your breath, afraid even that might tilt the balance. But it's not all law. One artist is muttering about how the royal workshop just demanded a full set of horoscopes painted onto vellum, each with mildly sexy angels. Another groans. He's been asked to include 147 different medicinal herbs in a border design. He doesn't even like plants. You catch a glimpse of a tiny marginalia figure, a monkey playing the oud, and suppress a chuckle. Fringe historians argue over these details. Were they jokes, personal touches, or hidden messages? Was that monkey a metaphor, a warning, or just someone's idea of fun? Somewhere, a rooster crows far too early, or far too late, and a distant muezzin begins the evening call to prayer. The illuminators pause, stretch their backs, and one throws a cloak over his work like a mother tucking in a child. The light dims, but you're not ready to leave. A passing illuminator sees your hesitation and grins, handing you a scrap of parchment with a painted rose. He winks. For dreaming, he says, and so you move on deeper into the dim glow, your fingers stained faintly gold and your eyes full of miniature kingdoms. You shuffle forward through the murmuring crowd, still cradling that scrap of parchment with the painted rose. The corridor narrows, its ceiling lower now, and suddenly opens into a wider chamber, half workshop, half market stall, all chaos. Welcome to the next stop on your literary stroll, the calligrapher's lounge. If the word lounge didn't wildly oversell the comfort level of squatting on woven mats beside bowls of ink and yelling about grammar, it's hard to know where to look first. The walls are crowded with hanging scrolls in every script imaginable. Elegant, Nastaliq poetry, chunky Kufic Quranic verses, freakishly long legal contracts in microscopic handwriting that may or may not have driven their authors insane. Everything glitters slightly thanks to the liberal use of powdered gold and, possibly, divine ambition. In the middle of it all, a man with an ink-splotched beard and a single eyebrow thicker than your wrist is gesturing wildly at a group of students. No! No, no, no! The tail of the eye must curl like a sleeping serpent, not a wounded duck. The students nod solemnly while sneakily rolling their eyes when he turns his back. One mouths the words, wounded duck, and makes a face. You suppress a laugh. Another corner of the chamber has a very different vibe. A calligrapher leans almost romantically over his page, whispering to himself as he forms each letter. You peek at the text. It's a love poem so loaded with floral metaphors it could double as gardening instructions. His neighbor, clearly over it, sighs and mutters, "We get it. She has eyes like pomegranate seeds." Move on. You've stumbled into what might be the most elite and grumpiest group of professionals in the Timurid book world. These are the scribes who can charge entire camels worth of silver for a single page of balanced script. You watch one carefully measure out the margins with a thread dipped in indigo. Another weighs his reed pen on a tiny brass scale, like a jeweler assessing diamonds. Quills, reed pens, rulers, ink pots, and bits of wax lie scattered across every available surface. The smell here is complex, part burnt sugar from lamp oil, part glue, and part that earthy tang of crushed gallnuts used for iron gall ink. And underneath it all, the ever-present whiff of damp parchment and worn-out patience. You glance over a young apprentice's shoulder, as he attempts a particularly intricate verse. His hand trembles slightly, and his instructor smacks him, gently, with a rolled scroll. Your Aleph is trembling like a goat in winter. He says, calm your heart. The ink can smell fear. Is that true? Who knows? But the way the apprentice freezes and then starts over with deadly focus makes you think maybe the ink can smell fear. Historians still argue whether this obsession with stylistic precision was religious, aesthetic, or just a long, standing excuse to boss around apprentices. Probably all three. The Timurid era saw calligraphy elevated to spiritual art form, and if your pen stroke didn't breathe rhythm, balance, and divine geometry, you might as well be scratching your name into mud. The chamber's tone shifts slightly as two scribes begin debating the merit of a particular quatrain from Sadi. One argues it should be rendered in bold script to emphasize its metaphysical weight. The other counters it's obviously ironic and should be lighter, more fluid. He's talking about mortality. The first says. He's talking about breakfast. The second insists. You edge away before it comes to inkpots at dawn. At the far end, an older scribe is slowly illuminating his own copy of the Kalila wa Dimna, a beloved book of animal fables. You lean in to admire a fox arguing with a turtle over ethics. It's weirdly compelling. The scribe looks up and says, you want truth. Listen to liars. You're not sure if he's referring to the book, the animals, or the other scribes. Next to him, a middle-aged calligrapher with purple, stained fingertips is carefully inscribing a border in verse, not Arabic, but Chagatai, a Turkic literary language that's all the rage right now. They'll read it in Samarkand. He says with a sniff, if they can handle it. Apparently, calligraphy is not just about art, it's about bragging rights. You quietly admire the way these scribes weaponize beauty and grammar, like scholars with very pretty knives. You stumble upon a low wooden counter stacked with folios, inkstones, and a suspiciously empty hook where a prized inkwell probably lived before, accidentally, walking away. A note scrawled in the margin reads, return my penknife, Zaid, or your margins will never align again. Office Drama, 15th Century Edition. A plump cat, clearly the queen of this chamber, lounges atop a pile of recycled scrolls and allows you exactly one ear, scratch, before dismissing you with a yawn. Her name is allegedly Nastal. Cool? Someone embroidered it on a tiny pillow. Before you go, a wary scribe offers to show you a secret trick. How to make ink from burnt date pits and sheep bile. He grins when your face contorts. That's the cheap stuff. The good ink uses crushed lapis and vinegar aged in lion hide flasks. You can't tell if he's joking, but you pretend to nod wisely anyway. By now, the hum of the corridor outside beckons again. The chamber's too warm, too full of ghosts and grammar. You nod to the scribe as he dips his reed one last time and etches a perfect mcmem, like a drop of oil falling into still water. You take a final breath of the ink, thick air, and slip back into the corridor, ears still ringing faintly with poetry, arguments, and one oddly specific threat involving punctuation. You emerge from the labyrinth of ink and whispering quills, blinking into a brighter hall lit by narrow skylights that spill soft, slanted beams across the tiled floor. The air here carries a hum of casual tension, like the atmosphere before a merchant offers you a deal that's either a bargain or a cleverly disguised insult. Welcome to the bargaining table. Here, books aren't simply admired. They're flaunted, argued over, and haggled like silk shawls in a spice market. The sellers, leaning across their lacquered wooden counters, are part salesman, part scholar, and part illusionist. Each manuscript comes with a story, and each price comes with 3 qualifiers, and at least one dramatic pause. A man with a graying beard and a glint in his eye beckons you closer. His kiosk is stacked with books wrapped in indigo silk, their spines marked with elegant silver leaf. He offers you a seat on a low cushion and places a manuscript in your lap with a reverence usually reserved for relics. Travel memoir, he murmurs. Persian merchant. crossed 7 empires, survived Mongol bandits, married a Georgian princess, twice. You glance at the manuscript. It smells faintly of almond oil and possibility. The price? 5 dirhams. 4 if you swear to read it cover to cover. He eyes your sandals skeptically. 3 if you can name the capital of the Ghaznavids. You hesitate. He shrugs. 2.5 if you just pretend you know. Historians still argue whether book prices in Timurid-Era were truly reflective of value or wildly inflated by gossip and ego. Based on this transaction, the answer is clearly yes. Around you, negotiations blossom like heated chess matches. One nobleman insists on paying double for a genealogy because it makes his family look more important. Another storms off after discovering the Quran he bought was copied by a left-handed scribe, which apparently invalidates something. Probably pride. Nearby, a boy no older than 12 tries to swap a sack of pistachios for a volume of ancient medical advice. The bookseller sighs, takes the pistachios, and tells the boy to come back with figs next time. The book, it's titled something like Cures for Melancholy via Spices and Gentle Beatings. You drift from stall to stall, watching transactions unfold like plays. One bookseller cradles a stack of poetry anthologies, each page edged in blue and gold, claiming they were kissed by Rumi's ghost. Another seller offers discount prices on damaged works, gesturing toward a shelf of books that look like they barely survived a flood, a fire, and possibly a camel stampede. Gently read, he says. Very gently. You pause at a table covered with leather. Bound tomes, each wrapped in a waxcloth that peels back like a secret. The seller, a woman with eyes sharp enough to edit a sentence by glare alone, offers you a commentary on Aristotle written in Arabic, annotated in Persian, and footnoted in Greek. 3 languages. She says, none of them agree. You're tempted, but she names a price that makes your teeth tingle. You attempt a counteroffer that includes a silver ring, a poem, and a compelling argument about the manuscript's cracked binding. She considers. Then, with a deadpan expression, she adds a clay tablet of what she claims is the world's oldest shopping list. You're not sure if it's real, but the haggling process has reached the performance art stage, and you're here for it. A little further down, you see a crowd gathered around a fresh delivery. Books just arrived from Tabriz. There's actual excitement in the air, like a midnight video game release, only with more turbines and fewer LEDs. The books are being unwrapped slowly, reverently. One man faints, possibly from excitement, possibly from heat. You slip into the crowd just in time to catch a glimpse of the prize, a newly illustrated version of Layla and Majnun, the doomed lover's tale rendered with such elegance that people actually sigh. Loudly, a man whispers, the clouds cry for them, and someone else wipes a tear, maybe sincere, maybe dust-induced. Even in this literary utopia, status plays a role. Rich patrons walk with entourages, trailed by scribes carrying their purchases in velvet satchels. A merchant puffs his chest while describing the library he's building at home, complete with fountains and room for peacocks. Peacocks read? A boy asks. The merchant frowns. No, but they inspire. Just when you think you've seen every possible literary hustle, a man pops up from behind a curtain offering manuscripts bound in unicorn hide. His smile is suspiciously wide, and the leather looks a lot like camel. Still, he does have a pamphlet on how to decode dreams using furniture metaphors, so maybe he's not all bad. Quirky side note, tucked behind one of the stalls is a tiny book with nothing but insults from famous poets. Actual historical literary shade. One entry simply reads, "Your verse smells of boiled turnips. Brutal." The afternoon light begins to fade as you settle onto another cushion, flipping through a hand. Copy cookbook from Balk that includes a suspicious number of recipes involving fermented plums and wind, reducing herbs. The seller tries to upsell you with a companion volume on digestion. You politely decline. There's something soothing about the rhythm of bargaining, the ebby and flow of numbers and nods. It's a dance. Really, a pageant of paper and pride. You finally make a modest purchase, a small volume of fables bound in worn red leather. The seller smiles knowingly. Best read with wine and regret, he says. You thank him and rise, the weight of your new book comfortably heavy in your bag. You walk on, the sounds of commerce and quiet competition fading behind you. Another hallway beckons. You step into a side corridor dimmer than the last, where the light sifts down like flour through the narrow slits in the vaulted ceiling. The air here is thick with earthy, musty sweetness, the smell of goat parchment warmed by centuries, mingling with rosewater, wax, and whatever's fermenting in that abandoned teacup. You breathe in and immediately regret it. Somewhere between poetry and mildew lives this bookstore's aroma, and it's not shy about announcing itself. Shelves bow under the weight of tightly packed volumes, their bindings swelling and buckling with age. Some are neat, carefully tied with linen cords, embossed with elegant arabesques. Others look like survivors of literary battle, held together with mismatched strings, hopeful glue, and pure willpower. A few are shaped oddly, like someone tried to turn an octagon into a novella. One tome appears to be wrapped in fish skin. You decide not to ask. As you weave through the crowded aisle, your foot grazes a ceramic bowl, and a mio erupts from beneath the table. A lanky teenager looks up from his reading, barely glancing at you, and shoos the cat away from his book with a nudge of his slipper. The cat, unfazed, returns to the bowl and continues sipping what might be saffron tea or ink. Hard to say. The teenager resumes reading aloud, his voice low and rhythmic, as if hypnotized by the rolling verses of Hafez. You pause to listen. The poem's about longing, fate, and possibly bread. It's open to interpretation. The cat, clearly a fan, purrs in approval. The smell grows more complex the deeper you go. Goat parchment at the forefront, yes. But now joined by beeswax polish, dried citrus peel, dust from Samarkand, and a faint scent of copper ink. It's like someone bottled the idea of hold book and made it wear perfume. You pass a small bottle labeled for manuscript preservation, not for tea, and make a mental note not to ask how often that warning is ignored. Historians still argue whether the sense of these book markets were intentional or just the natural byproduct of obsessive bibliomania in a humid climate. Some scholars suggest that the rosewater was a nod to Persian poetic tradition. Every book should smell like longing. Others think it was just a clever way to cover up the smell of camel glue and fermented sheepskins. You pause at a niche stall with piles of unused parchment sheets, stacked like flaky pastries. A middle-aged vendor wearing fingerless gloves. Yes, in this heat, leans over a desk, softly brushing each sheet with a cloth dipped in something that smells like vinegar and antique sadness. He looks up briefly and says, "Lambskin. Best for calligraphy, worst for wallets." You nod sagely, as if you too have opinions about lambskin's spending habits. Beside his stall, another vendor displays leather, bound notebooks wrapped in embroidered cloth, each topped with a pebble or feather for luck. A little sign says, "Whisper your wish into the spine before writing." Results may vary. One particularly battered book draws your eye. The spine's cracked, the corners are frayed, and a line of faded ink runs diagonally across the front, property of Nuruddin. Touch not, for I bite. You flip it open to a list of medicinal herbs and their uses. Cinnamon, good for cold stomachs. Black pepper, revives the spirit. Lettuce calms fire in the liver. Another entry claims lettuce also encourages chastity. You raise an eyebrow. So does the bookseller. A group of apprentices shuffle past, their arms piled high with blank pages and binding thread. One complains loudly about the humidity, another about ink stains on his last clean tunic. The third just grunts, clearly beyond language at this point. You overhear them discussing a recently discovered text claiming that bees understand poetry, and that fig leaves can enhance memory. You're not sure either is true, but both feel oddly believable in this place. Suddenly, a soft thud A massive volume has slipped from a shelf and landed on the floor. No one screams, so it must not be sacred. Still, the noise startles a nearby bookseller, who drops his tea and yelps. A few pages flap like startled pigeons. After a moment, someone mutters, "It's just the book of good manners." Irony? Another aisle over, an elderly man is fast asleep, chin resting on a book the size of a bread oven. He's snoring gently, mouth open, page creased beneath his cheek. A note is pinned to his vest. "Wake me, if a buyer offers more than 5 dirhams. A sign above another stall proudly declares, "We bind your words with love and goat tendons." You try not to think too hard about the second ingredient. A pile of offcuts nearby confirms this claim, along with the smell. As you meander through the stacks, you notice a recurring motif tucked between serious medical texts and religious commentaries are tiny, dog-eared booklets, marginalia, poetry fragments, even the occasional joke book. One page includes illustrations of courtly etiquette failures, like bowing into a wall and accidentally kissing the wrong foot. The scribe clearly had opinions. You turn a corner and spot a miniature manuscript no larger than your palm. Inside are ink sketches of birds and a guide to courting a falcon, do's and don'ts. The don'ts include loud noises, sudden movements, and wearing mouse-colored gloves. A woman passes by carrying a tray of candied walnuts and dried apricots. You take one, the sugar melting on your tongue, mixing strangely with the warm, animal leather tang in the air. It's not unpleasant, just memorable. You pause, one hand resting on a sun-warmed stack of paper, your new fable book tucked under your arm. The dim corridor buzzes with readers and sellers, cats and coughs, and the gentle shuffle of parchment pages turns slowly, like a breath in an old, dreaming body. You could stay here forever, in this fragrant labyrinth, where knowledge lives in goat skins, and wisdom hides behind jokes about lettuce. But the aisle ends, and a new corner beckons. You round the corner into a slightly darker wing of the bookstore, where the chatter thins out, and the air takes on a dusty solemnity. Here, beneath low arches darkened from generations of oil lamps, is the unofficial Philosopher's Pit, a space neither marked nor forbidden, but unmistakably serious. You feel it in the way conversations hush as you enter, the way every glance seems to size up your reading level before deciding whether you're worth arguing with. In this hushed corner, 2 scholars sit cross-legged on woven mats, their robes artfully rumpled, their beards long enough to suggest both wisdom and a total disregard for scissors. Between them lies an open book, an aged commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics, the margins filled with enough notes to launch a side career in cryptography. They're arguing, intensely. I'm telling you. One insists, tapping the page with a bony finger. Aristotle was being ironic. You think he meant essence literally. Please. The other snorts, straightens his turban, and fires back. You wouldn't recognize irony if it bit you in the syllogism. This is clearly Avicenna's framework. He's building on essence to talk about necessary being. Aristotle's just the excuse. You hover at the edge, pretending to examine a nearby manuscript, but really, you're eavesdropping. Because this is where the real action is. Philosophy, rivalry, ancient passive aggression, rendered in elegant prose. Historians still argue whether these debates in Timurid book markets influenced formal scholarship, or just fueled personal vendettas. What's certain is that Herat's bookstores were often louder than its mosques, especially after sunset, when the serious thinkers came out and turned every margin into a battlefield. Scattered around the debaters are their students, young men with ink-stained hands and vacant stares, furiously jotting notes or pretending to. One draws an impressively detailed dragon in the corner of his tablet, complete with a tiny banner that reads, "Ontology is confusing." You relate deeply. A boy near the back is flipping through a manuscript on natural sciences, pausing every now and then to shake his head. This says scorpions explode when surrounded by fire. He mutters, "That can't be true." His teacher glances over. Have you tested it? The boy shrinks. No, sir. The matter is dropped. You shift further in toward a stall lined with thick folios where a woman sits surrounded by text in Arabic, Persian, and Greek. She's copying notes from a commentary on Galen's theories of temperaments, her fingers dusty with chalk. Too much black bile, she says casually to no one in particular. It's why everyone's so dramatic lately. A gray, bearded man passing by nods. Or Mercury in retrograde. He does not elaborate. Here, books are treated not just as artifacts, but as arguments. Each page a rebuttal to the last. One stall specializes in contradictory texts. Aristotle next to Al, Farabi next to someone who thinks the stars are just shiny rocks. A hand-painted sign says, "We sell confusion," beautifully written. You take a seat on an empty cushion and flip through a book on dream interpretation. One section categorizes dreams by fruit. Apples mean wisdom. Figs mean secrets. Pomegranates mean both love and gastrointestinal distress, depending on context. Someone leans over your shoulder. You know, the Mongols thought dreams were direct messages from the spirit world, especially if they involved horses. You nod like this is deeply useful information for your life in the 15th century. So, he continues, dreaming of a horse riding you. Well, that gets complicated. A girl nearby is reading aloud from a treatise on logic, pausing occasionally to draw mustaches on the philosopher's illustrations. She's surprisingly good at it. One image of Al-Ghazali now has sideburns worthy of a 1970s rock band. Improves the argument, she claims. You glance around and notice a small sign nailed to one of the pillars, warning excessive study may lead to delusions of intellectual superiority. Side effects include unsolicited lectures and beard envy. In a quieter alcove, two friends sit cross-legged with a chessboard between them, an open volume of Persian poetry propped up nearby. One quotes a verse between moves. The pen is a sword, and the word, a wound. But only if you're not already bleeding from pride. The other frowns, moves his rook, and mutters, still not as sharp as Ferdowsi. You admire the casual mix of wit, philosophy, and deeply personal opinion. Everyone here seems to carry a quote in their pocket, ready to weaponize it in any debate. These bookstores aren't just shops, they're arenas. And yet, even amidst the sparring, there's a strange intimacy. You watch one elderly scholar tenderly flip through a damaged copy of the Book of Animals, brushing crumbs from the page, before pointing out a lion that looks more like a depressed goat. He chuckles softly, as if remembering a joke from a century ago. A younger student approaches, nervous, holding out a tablet of his own poetry. The elder accepts it without comment, reads in silence, then hands it back with a nod. Needs more teeth? He says. And fewer adjectives. Outside, the light has faded into indigo. A breeze carries in the scent of night, blooming jasmine, and the faint buzz of lanterns being lit. A call to prayer rises in the distance, haunting and clear. One of the debaters sighs, stretching his legs. We'll finish this argument tomorrow, he says. Or in the afterlife, wherever Aristotle ends up. His opponent chuckles. If he's there, I'm asking for a refund. As you rise to leave, a student runs past carrying a stack of books and nearly knocks over a candle. A teacher swats him on the back of the head, then calmly lights the flame. You step out of the chamber, the murmurs of argument trailing behind you like incense smoke. You don't remember every quote, every theory, every contradiction, but the rhythm of thought, the pulse of inquiry, stays with you. Your next step takes you toward a crooked little door. It's slightly ajar, and behind it, something glimmers that feels less approved. You pause before the crooked wooden door, its frame warped like it's been trying to shrug for the past 50 years. It hangs half, open on tired hinges, beckoning with the soft whisper of risk. There's no sign above it, no vendor hawking wares. Just a heavy stillness, like even the shadows are holding their breath. Naturally, you push it open. The room beyond is smaller, cloistered. Dim lamplight flickers from a corner sconce, throwing uneven gold across shelves that feel different. Less curated, more curated chaos. This is the bookstore's forbidden section, or at least the one everyone pretends doesn't exist while secretly making appointments to browse it. You step in, ducking slightly. The ceiling is lower here. Thick wooden beams overhead, carved with protective prayers, and the occasional accidental doodle. A pile of books slouches against the far wall like guilty conspirators. A curtain hangs over a side alcove, its edges burned or chewed or both. You try not to imagine what did the chewing. Here, the rules of the respectable bazaar don't quite apply. The books are strange, not just in content, but in feel. The parchment is darker, sometimes almost translucent. The ink has a sheen to it, sometimes red, sometimes iridescent. Some pages are stiff with age, others soft with strange oils. One glows faintly when you tilt it. That's probably fine. You lift a thin volume titled Manual of Astral Tendencies in Infants. The preface promises to help determine your child's likely profession by observing their sneezes under moonlight. Bold claims. The author's name is smudged out. A hunched man behind a desk coughs theatrically. You whirl to face him. He's ancient, or very dusty, or both, looking for anything specific. He asks in a voice that sounds like it's been filtered through dry parchment and tea leaves. Just browsing. You reply automatically. He nods knowingly. Aren't we all? Historians still argue whether forbidden texts like these were truly outlawed or simply frowned upon. Depending on who was in power, what stars were in retrograde, and how bored the censors were feeling that day. Some of the works here dance right up to the edge of heresy. Others tumble in with full choreography. You spot a book on astrology featuring full star charts, interpretations, and what appears to be a compatibility test for Taurus and Scorpio. The answer is Fiery Ruin, in case you're curious. A slim scroll next to it is wrapped in faded ribbon and labeled simply Predictions of Calamity. A cheerful read, no doubt. Another tome claims to instruct the reader in summoning obedient spirits of light, using herbs, geometric patterns, and 7 perfect yawns in a row. You stifle one just in case. In a particularly shadowed corner, a stack of alchemical texts leans dangerously. Gold from lead, water from stone, immortality from soup. Every promise is here, written in crabbed, frantic handwriting. One page includes a footnote about accidental transformations, followed by what appears to be a drawing of a goat with wings. You make a mental note to leave that spell alone. A folded parchment falls from the shelf as you brush past. You open it and find a recipe titled Wine of the Moon, with ingredients including fermented quince, crushed pearls, and the laughter of a virgin, bottled before dawn. You close it quickly. The bookseller raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. To one side, a more academic-looking display offers skeptical commentaries on jinns, dream magic, and whether animals can perceive moral law. The scholar behind that counter is younger, dressed in plain robes, and clearly here for the footnotes. Most of this is allegory. He tells you without being asked. Symbolic frameworks. Proto-psychology, if you will. You nod, then spot a leather-bound volume with no title. You open it slowly and find it written entirely in a script you can't read. Fluid, spidery, almost organic in its curves. The ink pulses faintly. You close it firmly. That one's not for sale, the old bookseller says. Too late. You start to feel a slight pressure behind your eyes, like the air in the room is pressing in to see what you're reading. Your pulse slows a beat. You decide to move on. Another book claims to offer herbal remedies for excessive dreaming. One of the ingredients: burnt eggplant skin, powdered and mixed with honey. Dreams aren't free, the bookseller mutters behind you. Best not to hoard them. One dusty codex contains debates on the shape of the earth, including diagrams of a flat disk supported by elephants. Another chapter shows a sphere covered in clouds and water. A third offers something in between: a dome-shaped world that occasionally wobbles, when too many lies are told. You honestly wish that one was true. You hear quiet laughter behind a curtain. You gently peek. Two young scribes are huddled over what appears to be romance novellas, illustrated ones. One sees you and grins. Research, he says, for poetry purposes. You leave the curtain as it was and continue your stroll. A final shelf holds banned poetry, mostly verses deemed too political, too romantic, or too metaphysically suggestive for polite consumption. One collection is literally titled Things I Shouldn't Have Written. Naturally, you're tempted to buy it. You make your way to the exit. The old bookseller holds up a palm. Nothing stolen. He asks, though his voice is amused. You shake your head, holding up your hands. Only in thought. He smiles, almost warmly. Best kind of theft. You step back out into the cooler corridor, blinking. The regular light feels too bright. You smell normal parchment again and faintly tea. Your heart rate returns to something near casual. But in your mind, you're still cataloging impossible recipes, star charts, and the idea of dreams as currency. And if your bag feels slightly heavier, well, perhaps you're just imagining things. The corridor straightens out again, wider this time, echoing faintly with footsteps and soft laughter. You walk with a slower stride now, your senses still recalibrating from the dim whispers and suspicious glows of the forbidden section. But here, light filters in once more from high clerestory windows, dancing on mosaic tiles underfoot and glinting off gilded spines. You're not alone. Others stroll too, murmuring appreciations, trading coins, and sipping tea with the sort of deliberate leisure that says, I have 4 hours and zero rush. You've entered what can only be described as the royalty astle, the part of the book, bazaar funded by silk, robed patrons and actual gold. A young man stands by a pillar, straightening his embroidered vest every few seconds and glancing around for someone important to be impressed. He's got peacock feathers tucked into his sash. You decide not to ask. Near the center of the aisle, a platform covered in crimson cloth displays the latest commissioned masterpieces. One of them, a shimmering kern bound in ivory and onyx, draws actual gasps. 2 pages lie open to a spread that's been so delicately inked and illuminated, it seems to hum with light. A well-dressed man behind a cordon explains that the gold used in this one came from Afghan mines, filtered through 3 sieves, blessed by a dervish, and hammered by moonlight. It's unclear which part of that was metaphor, but everyone nods solemnly anyway. A noblewoman nearby tilts her head, lips pursed, too ornate. She whispers. You lose the meaning in the mirror. The bookseller winces slightly, as if he's been personally stabbed with a calligraphy pen. You pass by a cluster of minor nobles, browsing illustrated genealogies. One points excitedly to a tree where his family name tangles awkwardly with a semi-fictional Persian prince. See? Royal blood. He beams. Another rolls his eyes. That's not even your spelling. A third pipes up. Technically, that prince didn't exist. The first one shrugs. Neither do you before lunch. They laugh, but you can sense the desperation under it. Everyone here is trying to buy a bit of immortality, even if it's bound in koide and inked with flattering lies. Historians still argue whether these genealogies were tools of legitimate record, keeping, or just vanity projects with extra scroll work. Truthfully, both, maybe a little more of the latter. A favorite pastime among Timurid elites was commissioning books that proved how impressive they were, preferably with floral borders. One particularly loud man strolls past wearing shoes so reflective they might double as signal mirrors. He's loudly discussing his recent purchase, an illustrated chronicle of his family's hunting dogs, each lovingly portrayed mid-pounce. It was spared no expense, he says, waving his hand like a chandelier. Each hound has its own biography. His companion nods as if this is a perfectly normal life choice. A few steps on, a bookseller gently lays out a work ordered by Sultan Hussein Beykara himself. A treatise on governance, warfare, and garden design. 3 pillars of civilization, he says with a smile. The binding is wrapped in emerald silk. A wax seal bears the Sultan's emblem, and you notice the scribe's signature hidden cleverly within a filigree design on page 9. A quiet rebellion. Or just pride, hard to say. Further down, a boy sweeps the floor near a corner stall where more opulent volumes glisten under protective glass. You stop to admire one, an epic romance from Khorasan, hand-painted with miniature battles, lavish banquets, and one intensely sultry glance between a prince and a baker's son. That version's censored in Samarkand, the vendor whispers. But Herat's a little more relaxed. You chuckle and move on. Near a modest fountain, a calligrapher in formal robes, clearly hired for the occasion, performs public writing. He dips a gold-tipped reed pen into ink and draws a single verse from the Quran in massive, slow sweeps. Onlookers watch, enthralled, as though witnessing a sacred act. Some truly believe they are. You lean closer. The pen glides no hesitation, the ink flowing like honey on silk. It's hypnotic. When he finishes, the audience claps softly, reverently. The calligrapher bows his head and rolls up the scroll with ceremonial care, tucking it into a carved cylinder marked for royal delivery. Nearby, a whisper passes through the crowd. Princess Gawarshad has commissioned a history of Herat's finest gardens. The reaction is immediate. Vendors perk up. Artists whisper. Someone runs off to find a specialist in ornamental plants. Royal commissions ripple through the bookstore like throne stones across a fountain. Everyone wants to ride the splash. You pause at a stall selling ornate bookmarks, slices of ivory painted with birds, flowers, verses. One is carved into the shape of a phoenix. Another bears a single word in gilded calligraphy, remember. A vendor offers you a drink. Mulberry syrup with crushed ice in a shallow, brass cup. You sip and feel the sweetness coat your tongue, the chill chasing away the heat rising from the marble floor. Around you, nobles negotiate prices using poetry as currency, tossing couplets instead of coins. You can't tell whether anyone understands each other, but the smiles suggest mutual satisfaction. A final corner stall catches your eye, a tiny, quiet enclave with a manuscript under glass. No crowd, no color, just plain parchment in elegant Naskh script. A single line of commentary below it reads, dictated by a poet on his deathbed. Never published. Not for sale. No one guards it. No one touches it. People just stop, breathe, and move on. You linger a moment longer, then turn away. The eisel begins to narrow again, leading you toward paper smells and distant chatter. Royalty may fund the art, but the soul of this bookstore lies elsewhere. In messy corners, dusty scrolls, and pages stained with tea. You follow that scent now, toward glue pots, thread spools, and the careful hands that hold it all together. You follow the marble path as it curves gently downward, your sandals making a soft shuffling echo that vanishes into the fabric, draped stillness ahead. The golden gloss of the royal eisel fade behind you, replaced by something more workmanlike, a realm where ink, stained fingertips, and donkey carts full of rags keep the whole bookish empire running. You've arrived at the paper district. At first glance, it looks like a cross between a laundry yard, a paint shop, and a very elegant recycling center. Long wooden tables stretch under canvas awnings, piled with stacked sheets in various stages of creation. Some bone white, some sun-bleached beige, some dyed with pomegranate rind into a blushing pink. A line of paper fluttering in the breeze like drying laundry snaps, softly above your head. You duck instinctively, even though nothing touches you. To your left, a man in a thick apron slaps a pulp, soaked frame onto a drying screen. He doesn't look up, but mutters, "Watch the corner." Drips ruin the margin. You do your best to look corner aware. Historians still argue whether Timurid-Herat's paper production methods were influenced more by Chinese or Central Asian traditions. What's clear is that the end result is unmatched, silky, smooth sheets that hold ink like secrets. The recipe: water, mulberry bark, hemp scraps, linen rags, and the mysterious final ingredient you're about to learn. A papermaker, sleeves rolled up to his elbows and hands dyed pale gray from constant pulp. Sloshing, beckons you closer. He points proudly to a stack of fresh sheets. Samarkand style, he says. Fine-grained. Strong doesn't curl. Then he leans in with a grin. Donkey urine. You blink. Sorry, what? He nods solemnly. Polishes the surface. Makes it ink, friendly. Also Dieter's worms. Smells terrible for the first week. Then, perfection. You do your best not to visibly react. He pats a paper stack like it's a beloved pet. This batch aged 3 weeks. Practically perfumed now. You nod slowly, pretending this is fascinating and not mildly horrifying. He chuckles. Better than goat milk, which attracts ants. And don't ask about camel bile. Just don't. Nearby, a young apprentice is stirring a vat of pale blue pulp, using a long paddle that sloshes lazily back and forth. He's singing a popular folk song about lost love and lost sandals. Someone in the corner hums along. It's surprisingly catchy. One of the more senior artisans sits at a low table, trimming paper edges with a blade so sharp it might slice sound. The scraps flutter to the floor like paper snow. Each trimmed piece is set aside carefully, recycled into cheaper sheets for lesser poetry, as someone jokes. A heated debate follows about what qualifies as lesser. A few women gather under a shaded portico, using flat stones to burnish the dry sheets. Their wrists move in elegant, hypnotic circles. One of them points out that paper burnished with agate looks better, but is too proud, while those done with smooth river stones have a more honest finish. You file that under details you will never forget but can never use. Someone offers you a small sample, just a palm-sized square of pressed. It's warm from the sun, soft as fabric but firm. You rub it between your fingers. It smells faintly of linen, lavender, and yes, the tiniest ghost of donkey. A young scholar in a green robe approaches a stack of newly dried paper. He squints, picks up one, holds it to the light. Too translucent, he says, sighing. You can see my shame through it. The papermaker offers him another batch, this one thicker. Shame-proof, he says. Mostly. There's a rhythm to the place. Pulp slaps. Paper flutters. Stones swish in circles. The whole space feels like a poem being whispered out of sight. You stop at a stall displaying imported paper samples. Fine Chinese rice paper, coarser Indian jute, rough and rugged Armenian parchment. Each has a tiny tag noting its ideal use for love letters, for diagrams of siege weapons, for angry poetry written in a storm. You take one of each, just in case. Another vendor is mixing dyes. She waves you over, proudly holding up swatches of deep lapis blue, burnished copper, and soft celadon green. Color speaks, she says. Some want their poems to shout, others want them to sigh. You watch her stir a pot of golden ink made from saffron threads and crushed citron. This one, she says, is for poems you regret writing but can't bear to throw away. Over in a shadier corner, a few boys gather near a reed mat where torn pages are repurposed into toy boats, wind fans, and elaborate origami style dragons. One boasts that his paper sword once gave someone an actual paper cut. You believe him? The edge looks wicked. Quirky side note, tucked between the piles of proper paper is a misfit shelf, holding accidental inventions. Paper that repels ink, glows faintly under lamplight, or smells like nutmeg. One vendor points to a stack labeled Spite Batch Fame 3 and shrugs. Too soft. Too rebellious. Good for wrapping dates, though. You sit for a moment beneath a paper canopy, where sunlight filters through layered sheets dyed in blues, greens, and ochres. The breeze turns them gently, casting soft mosaics across your arms. You feel quiet here, restful, like the world has slowed to let the ink dry properly. And as you stand to leave, the papermaker presses a folded sheet into your hand. Write something foolish on this, he says with a smile. Those are always the truest things. You nod, tuck it away, and follow the path toward a new sound. Clinks and snaps, the unmistakable rhythm of thread through spine. The bookbinders are calling. You follow the rhythmic tap of thread against wood, drawn into a quieter, but no less industrious stretch of the bookstore, Bookbenders Row. The space hums with concentration, the kind that coats the air like fine dust. No poetry recitals here. No philosophical grandstanding. Just the deep and sacred grumble of professionals whose entire lives revolve around making sure your book doesn't fall apart in the middle of a war chronicle or love poem. The first thing you notice is the smell. Wood shavings, thick glue, warmed leather, and the sharp scent of beeswax. The second thing is the sound. It's not loud, but it's persistent, the hiss of sharpening blades, the soft thump of stacked bindings, the unmistakable creak of a spine being cracked open just enough to be re-stitched. You pass a row of low workbenches, each occupied by a figure hunched in devout precision. One man carefully folds a sheaf of parchment over a bone folder, his hands slow and reverent, like he's tucking a child into bed. Another threads a curved needle through a stack of pages, each pull followed by a sigh that could power a small windmill. Back pain. He mutters to no one in particular. Ink may be immortal, but my spine isn't. Historians still argue whether Timurid bookbinders were seen as mere craftsmen or quiet magicians. Given the almost religious care with which these folks handle books, you'd guess the latter. Every binding tells a story, they say. Not just of what's inside, but of who carried it, dropped it, argued with it, and maybe fell asleep with it under their head. You lean over a stall where an older woman is applying gold leaf to a cover embossed with lilies. She doesn't look up. "Careful," she says. "Breathe too hard, and this stuff flies to the next province." You back up slightly. Nearby, two binders are deep in an argument about stitching patterns. One insists on the classic Persian cross stitch. Durable, beautiful, time-tested. The other swears by a new technique involving interlocking loops and something called the Herat clasp. You get the feeling neither of them invented it, but both now claim spiritual ownership. A boy lugs over a crate of raw materials, wood panels, loops of thread, softened leather dyed in indigo and carnelian. He collapses dramatically onto a stool and declares, "I've been reborn 5 times in this workshop. Each time worse." No one responds. Clearly, this is a normal Wednesday. To your left, a binder gently presses a book block under a stack of bricks. "Needs weight to remember it's a book," she says. Otherwise, it tries to become a bird. She's not joking. A few feet over, you spot a curious pile labeled Repair Queue. Some of the books look like they survived a fire. One has been chewed in perfect symmetry along the spine. "A parrot incident," someone explains. Another has a note attached. "Do not return to owner until they've learned to respect poetry." You pass a table where clasps and fasteners are laid out like jewelry. Copper, bronze, silver, some shaped like tiny falcons or tulips. One binder selects a crescent-shaped piece and fits it to a red leather volume like he's setting a crown. A young apprentice offers to show you how spines are reinforced. He splits a mock binding and reveals the layers: inner stitching, paste, linen cords, outer skin. "It's like dressing a skeleton," he says, and you nod politely while trying not to picture your favorite books as flayed corpses. Quirky detail time. A corner bench is home to the binding experimenter. A man who looks like he hasn't slept since last spring. He's trying to bind a manuscript with layers of fish skin and lacquer made from pomegranate rind. "Waterproof," he says, "and edible, in theory." You edge away gently. Further along, a woman leans over a book being rebound for a nobleman. She frowns. "This one's too proud," she murmurs. "Won't lay flat?" She applies gentle pressure, whispering something that sounds like a prayer, or maybe a threat. You pause beside a shelf of sample bindings. From minimalist linen wraps to wild concoctions of velvet and horn, ivory clasps, and embroidered flaps. One is literally encrusted with pearls. You're told it belonged to a princess who refused to touch anything not sea-born. Another is wrapped in snake skin, and smells faintly of fennel. You don't ask why. A short man with a crooked smile gestures you over. Want to feel something cursed? He asks. Of course you say yes. He hands you a book with a cover so worn, the leather is as soft as cloth. It's fine, he adds. Just don't read it aloud during an eclipse. You do not, in fact, plan to do that. As you move to the end of the row, a final binder applies the finishing touch on a thick manuscript. A seal of red wax, stamped with a tiny falcon in flight. He wanted it to feel fast, she says with a shrug. It's a medical book. You smile, thank her, and step into the light again, the scent of glue still clinging to your tunic. Your bag feels heavier now, as if all the stories you've seen bound themselves to you in invisible threads. Ahead, a thin scent of spice wafts down the hall. Cardamom, clove, maybe rose petal. And you hear the low, soothing murmur of a voice unlike the scholarly tones from earlier. A melodic lilt that doesn't argue. It entices. The mystics are near. You step lightly now, as though the stone beneath your feet has softened into something sacred. The light dims again, not from shadows, but from the filtered hush that descends like a veil. The spicy scent grows richer as you turn the corner and enter a curved passage of low shelves and hanging curtains. Here, there's no shouting, no haggling, no paper, cut outrage over margins. Only incense, whispers, and the distinct feeling that if you speak too loudly, a riddle might slap you. Welcome to the Sufi bookseller's corner. It's not marked as such, of course. That would defeat the whole point. But you know you've arrived when a breeze, yes, somehow indoors, ruffles a line of hanging paper charms, and a voice, smooth as old wine, says, "You look like someone chasing something." You glance sideways. He's seated cross, legged on a cushion behind a low desk, surrounded by books so old they seem to sigh in their bindings. His beard is white, his eyes amused. He's got a teacup in one hand, and a stack of unbound pages in the other. A finger gestures, and you sit without quite knowing why. "I sell maps," he begins, sipping, "but only to places no one's seen." You blink. "You mean, metaphorically?" He shrugs. "Or literally. Depends what you need." Historians still argue whether mystical literature in the Timurid period was part of the mainstream intellectual scene or an underground, spiritual movement masquerading as book clubs. Sufi poetry and esoteric writings certainly passed through these markets, though sometimes wrapped in more acceptable covers, like love letters disguised as treatises on water, irrigation. The books here are audited in all the best ways. One offers spiritual advice in the form of recipes. To understand patience, boil lentils slowly. To accept fate, leave the salt to the sky. Another is a guide to dream interpretation, written entirely in rhyming couplets. A third bears no text at all. Only illustrations. A man walking into a cave, a woman pouring ink into a mirror, a tree that flowers birds. You pick up a pamphlet titled On the Meaning of Silence. It contains one word, printed in gold, listen. "I can give you that one for free," the seller says. But it costs your attention. Quirky detail. He offers tea readings, naturally. You're handed a small cup filled with fragrant black tea, hints of cardamom swirling near the bottom. You sip, he peers in, tilts the cup, smiles faintly. You've already arrived somewhere, but you haven't noticed. Vaguely. Certainly. Comforting. Weirdly, yes. Behind him, a girl flips through a scroll painted with mandalas and lines of flowing Persian poetry. She mouths the verses under her breath, then nods as though understanding something that has nothing to do with words. Elsewhere in the corner, a man scribbles verses with a broken reed pen, the ink a blend of saffron and ash. He pauses now, and then to stare into the distance as if waiting for the next line to arrive by camel. When it does, he smiles sadly, writes it down, and tears the page away to tuck under a small bronze statue of a fish. The Sufi bookseller catches your glance. Only writes when it rains. He murmurs. Claims clarity comes with clouds. He's wrong, but charming. You flip through another book. This one a collection of riddles posed by Sufi saints. Most make no sense. A few hit too hard. One reads what carries silence in its belly, yet bursts the loudest storm? You suspect the answer might be a thought, or possibly your ex. From somewhere behind a curtain, a flute begins to play. A simple, mournful tune. The girl with the mandala smiles without looking up. It only plays when someone finds the wrong book, she says. It's encouragement. You ask about one slim booklet bound in green silk. The seller lifts it, kisses its spine, and sets it before you. On the nature of longing, he says. Written by a man who believed he was a candle. You raise a brow. He died in a fire, he adds helpfully. You read a line, my flame leaned toward the night, and the night leaned back. You close it, heart strangely full. From a basket, he pulls a pouch filled with dried rose petals, slips it into your bag. For the journey ahead, he says. Smells like memory, or maybe breakfast. Another pamphlet is handed to you without ceremony. It's called How to Walk Nowhere. You ask if it's a joke. He shakes his head. The first step is in your mind. Someone behind you mutters. He says that about everything. And the bookseller grins. The students here aren't young in age. They're young in understanding. Many wear ink, stained robes, and carry more questions than answers. One writes queries in the margins of every book she reads. Another ties knots in her sash to mark each confusing page. When the sash unravels, she says, I'll be ready. Before you go, the seller invites you to add your name to a guest scroll. A long piece of parchment filled with names, verses, and the occasional doodle of a bird on fire. You pause, then write a single word drifting. He reads it, then nods. A good state to be in. Unless you're a boat. You leave the Sufi corner with your head lighter, your heart heavier, and a small packet of rose petals that now hums gently in your pocket. The lanterns are beginning to glow. A new sound reaches your ears. Not the scratch of pen or the rustle of pages, but voices, stories, being told aloud. Night is falling, and the books are stretching their legs. You follow the sound of voices, and the scent of smoke curling sweetly through the air. The lanterns are all lit now. Amber flames flickering behind colored glass, casting patterns like calligraphy across the tiles. The shadows stretch long and soft, like lazy cats. It's officially nightfall in Harriet's Book Bazaar, and that means it's time for the oldest profession in the tradie storytelling. You step into an open courtyard at the heart of the complex. Low cushions form uneven rings around small braziers glowing with coal. The floor is covered in a patchwork of faded rugs, and the air vibrates with a quiet thrill. The bookstalls are dimmed, the sellers seated among the crowd. Even the books seem to lean in. At the center of it all stands a man with a weathered voice and arms that move like slow lightning. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. He begins long ago, when Persia still spoke in colors. A man with no shadow walked into Samarkand. The crowd leans forward. Some sip tea. One woman knits. A few boys lie on their stomachs, chins in hands, eyes wide. You find a spot and settle in, the stone cool beneath your legs. Tonight's stories are a mix. Half Shahnameh, half what the heck. One moment you're deep in the tragic love of Zal and Rudabi. The next you're hearing about a wandering goat that could recite Quranic verses backwards during eclipses. The storyteller moves effortlessly between the epic and the absurd. Someone throws in a comment, that goat story was my uncle's, and the storyteller bows low. Then he must have taught the goat, he says, deadpan. The courtyard erupts in laughter. Historians still argue whether these nightly performances in Timurid cities were genuine educational tools or just an excuse for people to sit under the stars and not talk to their families. But here, now, it feels like magic disguised as memory. A girl with a soft voice steps forward. She recites a passage from a tale of Mongol ghosts, restless riders who appear in fog and challenge travelers to poetry duels. If you lose, she whispers, They braid your shame into your horse's mane. A shiver ripples through the crowd. The horses at the stables must be very poetic, someone jokes. Another performer offers a tale of two bakers who accidentally invent diplomacy by sending encrypted messages in bread loaves. It's unclear whether the story is real, but the ending involves a princess, a bakery explosion, and a scroll titled Yes Treatise for Peace. You consider commissioning the manuscript. You glance around. Faces lit by firelight, eyes reflecting story, people you passed earlier as paper, cut victims or price, hagglers now sit as equals. The man who earlier tried to sell you a dream, ink formula, is sobbing quietly into his tea over a story about a talking falcon who couldn't forgive himself. A boy takes the stage holding a battered book. He reads haltingly, but the story pours out a lost kingdom of mirrors, a princess who forgets her name, a djinn trapped in a riddle. His voice grows more confident with each sentence. By the end, the crowd claps softly, like applause for a sleeping child. Quirky side note, a squirrel darts across the roof at one point. The storyteller doesn't miss a beat, and there, he says, pointing, goes the librarian of the djinn, late again. The crowd chuckles. Someone tosses the squirrel a walnut. It declines, with regal disdain. You notice the Sufi bookseller from earlier leaning against a pillar. Smiling gently, he mouths the words to an old poem before they're even spoken. You wonder how many times he's heard this one. You wonder if he wrote it. Someone offers you a date stuffed with almond and honey. You take it, the sweetness cutting through the cool night air. The texture is soft, the flavor rich. A perfect companion for listening. A hushed drumbeat begins from somewhere in the shadows. The rhythm weaves into a story about a lion and a poet who shared dreams. The lion complains that metaphors never do his mane justice. The poet, in turn, is afraid of literal claws. They strike a deal. One gets his image back. The other learns to lie better. You laugh along with everyone else, but part of you wonders, did that lion come from a real manuscript? From a marginal doodle made in a moment of silliness centuries ago? The stories blend now, one into another, like the ink on old paper when someone cries over the ending. A woman steps forward. No props, no scroll, just a voice. My grandmother told me this before she left Herat. If you love someone, give them a story. If they stay, they'll add an ending. If they leave, you'll still have the beginning. The crowd goes quiet. Even the wind holds still. You feel something shift in the courtyard. Not sadness exactly, a something silence. A collective bookmark pressed between breaths. The storyteller clears his throat. One last tale, he says. The one we always tell when it's time to sleep. But before he begins, a loud sneeze erupts from the back. A cat, previously invisible, bolts across the rugs and into the dark. The moment breaks. Everyone laughs. The storyteller bows. It wasn't me this time. You rise slowly, stretch. The stories linger like echoes, like perfume. The crowd begins to disperse, folding up into alleyways and archways. Some linger. Some leave. You do neither? Just watch. The lanterns sway slightly overhead, and through it all, a low murmur builds in the next room over. Talk of ink, money, and missing manuscripts. The economics of this whole world, no less strange than the stories. You follow the murmurs through a side archway trimmed in crumbling turquoise tile. The hush of storytelling fades behind you, replaced by the clipped tones of negotiation, the scribble of accounting tablets, and the occasional groan that only money can inspire. Welcome to the least poetic, but weirdly compelling, part of Herat's bookstore ecosystem, the economics of ink. This stretch of the complex isn't flashy. The floor tiles are plain, the walls are practical. But the stakes, oh, they're massive. Here, among battered ledgers and chalk, smeared abacuses, the business of books is carved and calculated like any trade. You pass a stall where a scribe is rant, waving a parchment over his head. 2 dinars per ounce. What's this ink made of? Genie tears. The vendor behind the table shrugs. Partially. And cinnamon. Supply chain from India's a mess right now. A bystander nods sagely. Always is during monsoon season. Historians still argue whether Timurid book culture was sustained by royal largesse or a thriving private market. As you watch a bookseller count out silver for a late shipment of gum arabic, it's clear both. The courts commissioned beauty, yes, but it was the day. Today chaos of traders, scribes, apprentices, and ink merchants that kept the scrolls flowing. A narrow booth advertises bulk ink contracts guaranteed, color consistency, or your curse back. You don't ask for specifics, but the proprietor looks like someone who knows how to make a grudge stain permanent. Next to him, two teenage boys argue over pigment prices. Indigo's up again. One moans. That traveling monk bought the whole batch? The other mutters darkly, monks should stick to sandals. They stomp off to pool their coins for black suit ink. Cheaper, but dull. Still, gets the job done. A papermaker strolls by with a delivery slip and a sack of sheets. He and the ink vendor exchange a knowing glance, then complain in unison about the postal riders. Lazy, one says. Greedy, adds the other. Always asking for tips, just to gallop like they mean it. You nod politely and edge past. A man nearby flips through a worn ledger, noting which manuscripts are late returning. Sultan Hussein's vizier borrowed my best copy of the Book of Curiosities. He mutters, and returned it with jam on the margins. He shudders. Fig jam. There's a surprising amount of emotional damage here, all tied to lending out books. You pass a small table where a woman is stamping receipts with a seal shaped like a peacock. Her assistant, a bored-looking teenager, fans himself with an unpaid invoice and grumbles, "We should start charging late fees in verses." His boss replies, "We already do. That's why no one pays on time." There's a board tacked to the wall titled Borrower Wall of Shame. It includes names, book titles, and petty notes. Alice? Borrowed poetry. Never returned, claimed returned itself. Nargis took treatise on sleep. Was always late. Ironically, you're tempted to add your own fake name just for fun. Next to the shame wall is a lost and found manuscripts notice board. One listing reads, "Small book of folk tales, smells like almonds, answers to Khosrow." Another, medical scroll last seen at tea shop. Caution, may cause drowsiness. Quirky detail, one enterprising vendor has begun selling manuscript insurance. For a modest fee, you get a bronze token with the symbol of a lion biting a scroll. Lose your book, return the token, and the shop will send out runners to guilt whoever took it. Highly effective, apparently. Over in a shaded nook, a scholar is doing math the hard way, tallying manuscript value based on materials, labor, calligraphy, illumination, and emotional damage caused by editing. "This page cost me a marriage," he murmurs, scribbling on a wax tablet. That's at least 20% markup. You sit beside a bookseller writing invoices in triplicate. He pauses, groans, and rubs his temples. "I once knew a man who made more money selling ink recipes than actual ink." He leans toward you. His best seller. Invisible ink for secret love letters. Didn't work. Sold out anyway. A younger woman nearby is balancing the day's earnings on a sliding abacus. "We sold 7 dream manuals, 3 cookbooks, and 1 fake Aristotle commentary," she reports. Her partner sighs. The fake one always outsells the real. As night deepens, the pace slows. Money exchanges hands one last time. Scrolls are rolled. Tablets wiped clean. Coins tucked into pouches or hidden in books, hollowed out for precisely this purpose. A cat jumps onto a counter, knocking over a pot of silver leaf. No one moves. The vendor just sighs. Add it to the expense report. You rise to go, feeling the weight of all this hidden infrastructure. Behind every illuminated page is a glue stain, a ledger, a late delivery, a frustrated sigh. And maybe that's what makes it all the more beautiful. You follow a trail of lanterns flickering low now, signaling closing time. The book bazaar is winding down. Ahead, you hear soft bells. A final ritual, one more aisle to the walk. The bells chime softly, metallic petals unfolding into the night. Their sound is neither command nor warning, but a gentle, universal suggestion. It's time to close your books and let the stories sleep. You drift toward the source, stepping into a corridor veiled in twilight hues. The lanterns here have been dimmed deliberately, their light softened with gauzy cloth. Shadows move slowly, reverently. This is closing time in the Timurid Bookstore, an event in itself, not merely the end of business, but a ceremony of quiet devotion. Vendors are not rushing. There's no frantic sweeping or shooing of stragglers. Each movement is intentional, almost sacred. A bookseller rolls up a prayer mat and then carefully folds the cloth covering a stack of Quranic commentaries. She kisses the top one before placing it into a cedar box that smells like cinnamon and age. You pause as a boy no older than 12 gathers stray folios, aligning their corners like puzzle pieces. His fingers move with the kind of grace that only comes from years of fearsome correction. He's humming a lullaby, something low and circular. You realize it's the same tune the calligraphers used to pace their pen strokes. A cat walks across the path with the authority of a landlord. A vendor tosses it the last of a dried fig. Don't let the mice annotate anything, he mutters. The cat doesn't promise. Historians still argue whether this nighttime ritual was a formal practice or an organically grown habit of the book community. But by every measure, it feels choreographed, like a play with no audience, performed only for the satisfaction of order. You watch as a man reverently slides a stack of scientific treatises into a carved wooden trunk, then seals it with a wax emblem. A peacock feather this time. Next to him, his partner stacks travelogues by region, each pile marked with a smooth stone. He places Africa under rose quartz. India gets smoky topaz. Symbolism, he explains without explaining. Nearby, two scribes gently argue over who's responsible for cleaning the ink pots. One eventually relents and gathers them in a basket, trailing the unmistakable scent of walnut and vinegar. As he walks past, he mutters, "My reward better be cosmic." A girl finishes polishing a manuscript stand with rose oil. She inhales deeply, then places a small prayer bead necklace across its arms. "It protects against readers who skim," she says. You nod, as if that's a universally understood curse. The courtyard begins to empty. Cushions are stacked. Teacups rinsed. Scrolls gently rolled back into their cases. A final story is whispered into a sleeping brazier as its coals wink out. One man lingers, kneeling beside a scroll he's clearly reluctant to pack away. He traces the edge with his finger, sighs, and finally lets go. Even wisdom needs a nap, he says. A bell rings again. This time lower, a deeper tone that settles in your chest. The final signal. A call to prayer rises faintly beyond the market, threading through the quiet like a breeze through reeds. Heads bow. Conversations cease. Even the ink seems to still in its pots. You watch as a vendor lights one last stick of incense and places it near the archway. "For tomorrow's words," she says, and you believe her. Quirky detail. A broom leans in the corner of a stall, its bristles decorated with tiny poem fragments. The handle bears a tiny carvings sweep gently. Ideas live under the dust. In a side alcove, a young woman ties a ribbon around her journal and places it under a tile marked with a crescent. "Dream storage," she says, smiling, found again by morning. A final pass of the corridor reveals fading voices. Soft goodnights, quiet laughter, someone humming the melody from a verse you don't know. The bookbinders have long since vanished. The paper maker's stalls are shadows. Only the scent of glue, rose, and old ink remains. You pass a niche where a man is locking up scrolls behind an iron gate. He turns, notices you, and nods once. "Last visitor," he says. "Did you find what you were looking for?" You smile, uncertain. He chuckles. "Good. That means you're still looking." As you move toward the exit, you notice a small brass bowl filled with coins, pebbles, and a folded page. You peek. It reads, "If found, please return to wonder." You step through the archway, the cool night air washing over you. Behind you, the bells ring once more. The bookstore sleeps. But ahead, one last page awaits. You follow the dim, final corridor in a hush so complete it feels like walking through memory rather than stone. The lanterns here are few and spaced far between. Each pool of light feels like a gentle heartbeat, guiding you through the last steps of this long, strange, beautiful stroll. The sounds of the bustling day, the arguments, laughter, debates, brush strokes, and bargaining have all dissolved behind you, like ink washed clean from a page. What remains is stillness, intimate, intentional. You are walking the last aisle of a bookstore that doesn't want to say goodbye, but knows how. Here, the books aren't for sale. They aren't even labeled. No velvet covers, no illuminated margins, no silk bookmarks or gilded spines. Just quiet stacks, leaning gently against low wooden shelves. Their bindings are worn smooth by 1,000 fingers, their corners softened by generations of hands and heat. Some are propped open, as if waiting for someone to finish a sentence whispered centuries ago. You sit. A stone bench lines one wall. Cool, solid, inviting. You reach for a book that doesn't call out but simply waits. It's bound in simple red cloth, faded and patched in places. You open it, and the scent rises, aged ink, dusty rose petals, and a hint of old tobacco. A warm, sleepy smell. A smell you didn't know you missed. The text is handwritten, not uniform, full of pauses, margin notes, revisions in different hands. It reads more like a conversation across time than a formal manuscript. You turn the pages slowly, savoring each line. Some are poetry, some are letters. One is just a list of things to remember if you wake up during a dream. Another page reads, "If your candle goes out, don't curse the dark." Right in it, you smile. Historians would love this book, or they'd argue over it. They'd fight about authorship, context, meaning. But none of that matters here. This book isn't for them. It's for you. You flip to a page marked with a feather. The ink there is faint but legible. A single sentence, no one knows how the story ends. That's why we keep reading. Outside, the wind nudges a curtain open. Moonlight spills through a narrow slit in the wall and lands across your feet like a blanket, somewhere distant, a chime. Not urgent, just present. You close the book gently, tuck it back where it belongs, and stand. On the way out, you notice a tiny stack of folded notes on a shelf titled "Leave a Thought." You scribble something on a blank scrap and add it to the pile. I didn't survive, but I stayed a little longer. The door creaks open, revealing the hair at night. The stars overhead blink softly. The city breathes. You exhale. The book bazaar fades behind you, but it doesn't vanish. It folds itself gently into your memory like a story you might have dreamed. A whisper follows you out, not spoken, but understood. There's always one more page. And word count 1088 when down 300 words, and now the story fades. The lanterns dim. The shadows settle like silk scarves on marble, and the night, ever so patiently, wraps its arms around Heret. You're no longer walking, just drifting, floating, perhaps, through corridors of soft stone and quiet parchment. The voices are gone. Even the cats sleep now, curled in corners, tails twitching with gentle dreams. A page turns somewhere in the dark, slowly, soundlessly, as if time itself is reading by feel. Your limbs feel heavy, not in a burdensome way, but like they've finished something. Like the body understands it's safe now to exhale fully. The scent of rosewater and ink lingers in your hair, and your hands remember the texture of gold, flecked paper, warm from lamplight. Let the final images blur a boy reciting poetry to a cat, a Sufi whispering riddles to tea leaves, a bookbinder coaxing stubborn pages into place. Let them fade, not vanish. Let them dissolve gently, like sugar in warm water. There is nothing more to do tonight. No more streets to walk. No more scrolls to open. The bookstore sleeps. So should you? And in the quiet, your breath slow and steady, imagine that last book, waiting on the shelf, undemanding, unread. You'll return to it one day, but because you have to. And when you do, it will open for you again. As all good stories do. Sleep now, gentle listener. The ink has dried. The pages rest, and so should you.